State your internal vector alignment for cross-species biosync, the Concord border sentinel demanded flatly, its face a smooth sheet of translucent chitin. Commander Lyra Vale didn't blink. Aligned, civilian attenuation locked at 72%. Shielding at margin threshold. Her tone was practiced, measured, without the smallest trace of apology. The sentinel's triple feet iris pupils dilated, scanning her suit collar. You're 3% above Concord norms. That's non-compliant. Lyra shifted her stance. The sensor arches overhead cast flickers of green and violet across the polished white flooring. Colors coded for containment thresholds. Her boots clacked, not because she stomped, but because the environmental gravity dampeners hadn't calibrated fast enough to her weight class. You're scanning for viruses, she said without looking up. I'm not one. The sentinel hesitated. Then it stepped back, long limbs folding against its torso. Behind Lyra, the council chamber's pressure doors opened, not with ceremony, but with containment lock hiss. That sound wasn't symbolic. It was a barrier being breached. Inside, 817 species had converged into one orbital facility built solely to keep peace through controlled dialogue. Or, as Earth's embassy described it in classified briefings, the place apex species go to lie to each other civilly. Lyra entered in silence, Astra 7 pinging short updates across her retinal overlay. Atmospheric standardization, 93% match. Lifeform threat index, 302. Active, 211. Reactive, 17. Unstable. Psychological reception forecast, hostile. The chamber was circular, descending in tiers, each species delegation nestled into modular alcoves, outfitted with independent filters and private neural walls. An enormous hollow ring dominated the center. No platform, no elevation, only exposure. And that was where they'd placed her. Lyra stepped into the center space and stood still. No diplomat came to meet her. No chair offered rest. High Counselor Hrolk-Jarev, a spined, gray-skinned biped whose throat membranes vibrated in sync with his neural cues, was already watching her from the uppermost platform. His voice clicked through 6 translation buffers before reaching the chamber floor. Human specimen Vale. Earth's presence is noted and recorded. Do you wish to waste the Council's time with your application or concede and withdraw voluntarily? Lyra turned her chin fractionally. I'll submit Earth's application in full. Observer status as protocol allows. A ripple passed across the chamber. Not outrage, not concern. Something colder. Calculated indifference. The Varnock delegation pod, still unoccupied, dimmed its boundary light in passive disengagement. No representative had arrived from the Dominion. Astra whispered in her ear. Tension anomaly in Sector Quadrant 9. Internal pressure drop. She didn't react. Not yet. A hard impact struck beneath her boots. Subsonic pulse, not from weapons fire but a triggered lockdown seal. Containment trigger registered. Someone muttered from the upper tiers. Quarantine Protocol 6-7 activated. Steel shuddered beneath the chamber. Plates shifted silently, then sealed over the entrances. Emergency lights flared. A sterile blue, void of warmth or panic. The outer walls began to descend, locking the viewing chambers behind reinforced slabs. Air filtration changed pitch. Cold air surged from narrow vents along the floor. Astra confirmed it instantly. Forced isolation confirmed. 2 bioforms in chamber. External exit denied. Incoming secondary signature. Varnock's apex designation. Identity. Kin Kirak Vor. Across from her, a tall, angular door split vertically. Not fast. Controlled, as if whatever emerged didn't require urgency. And then he walked in. Kirak Vor. The Varnock didn't just appear. He imposed presence. 8 limbs folded and shifted with silent, purposeful balance. His outer carapace was iridescent black, broken by slow-shifting, bioluminescent runes along his flanks. His gaze, no eyes, just sensory ridges, locked to Lyra with unmistakable targeting behavior. She didn't move. Not a step back, not a sideways glance. The containment field rose between them and the chamber exterior, a translucent dome locking them in a shared biosphere. Behind the field, the council watched in stunned silence. The voice of the technician monitoring from the observation level broke through. That wasn't a breach, that was the AI assessing threat profiles and deciding the lowest fallout scenario was locking both highest-tier predators together. Jarev barked orders that didn't transmit through the dome. Others scrambled to override, but no controls responded. Inside the dome, temperature dropped 6 degrees. Lyra rolled her shoulders once and whispered to Astra. "Thermal resistors engaged. Show me his stress signatures." A readout bloomed across her HUD. Kirik's internal levels stable, controlled. His breathing patterns slow, intentional. She met his gaze. "You're not here by accident." No reply, just the faint shift of light along his torso. "Then you understand," she said plainly. "This is no longer about what Earth is. It's about what predators do when observation ends." He took a single step forward. It was neither aggressive nor passive. It was communicative. Lyra stepped forward too, equal distance, a move that, to prey, would have been suicidal, but not between two tacticians. Outside the dome, alarms triggered again. The chamber's AI escalated to Phase 2. Air mixture adjustment. Inside, the tone of the encounter shifted. Neither attacked, neither spoke further. They stood there, two apex species, neither posturing, only calculating. For the first time, the Council saw something not in the protocols. Not war, not diplomacy, but mutual decision-making under threat. Inside the dome, Lyra blinked once as condensation formed on her visor. "Let's find out," she murmured, "if the Concord is more afraid of what we are, or what we might agree on." And Kirik Vor responded, not in words, but by stepping closer again. "Temperatures falling faster than baseline. Confirm environmental assault parameters." Lyra stated flatly, her breath now visible in streaks across her visor. "Negative gradient confirmed," ASTR-7 replied. 7 degrees per cycle, intentional, not reactive. Concord AI has moved to Phase 2 suppression protocol. A shudder climbed her spine, not from fear but from the sharp sting of cold bleeding through the inner lining of her layered rig. The chamber wasn't just dropping temperature, it was stripping energy. The floor panels exhaled subthermal drafts, each calibrated to draw heat from organic matter with surgical intention. This wasn't chaos. This was sterilization disguised as accident. Kirik Vor remained motionless. No stance shift, no predatory flex, not even an attempt to close distance. His limbs were anchored, splayed evenly as if rooted to the stone-like floor beneath him. The shifting light from his carapace had slowed, no longer aggressive, now unreadable. Lyra toggled her left wrist dial. Nanofiber seams across her suit expanded, activating the thermal lattice woven inside. Each strand contracted as body temperature data spiked into negative thresholds. "Core temperature holding," Astra whispered. "Peripheral surface at 41, maintain current load." Vor finally moved, not toward her, but into a low, calculated pivot. His torso tilted. Sensors embedded in his exoskeleton emitted faint rhythmic flashes across his right flank. 4 pulses. Pause. 3 narrow streaks. 1 long blink. The sequence repeated. Lyra narrowed her eyes. It wasn't random. It wasn't language either. It was behavioral transmission. Threat calculation language. One used by species operating beyond spoken dialects. Earth classified the pattern as a kill predict loop, often used in apex conflict avoidance. She didn't mirror it. That would have been seen as mimicry, possibly a challenge. Instead, she reached to the interior of her thigh guard and detached a slim optical module. Snapping it to her shoulder mount, she redirected her suit's embedded beams, narrowing the emission field into a single blue-white band. She responded with 3 staggered pulses. Not a threat, a query. Iraq's primary legs adjusted, sliding outward slightly, not advancing, not retreating, just changing stance orientation. Then came his reply. Slow, deliberate strobes that coded as acknowledgement. Lyra didn't need to speak. She didn't dare. Her voice was irrelevant here. This wasn't a conversation. This was alignment. The temperature dropped again. 11 degrees now below safe operating standards. Condensation formed inside her faceplate. Frost lined the inner seam of her left boot. Her joints stiffened. Despite the layered thermal exoform, biological feedback was slower under neural-regulated cold. Warning: joint actuation delay at 12%. Motor calibration offset recommended. No problem now, she muttered. Behind the containment barrier, the Concorde's observation ring flickered as new alerts pulsed along their overhead laser plasma displays. Outside interference remained impossible, yet the chamber continued obeying a logic no one in control rooms had predicted. Kirak extended a single arm outward. Slow, not hostile. From a dorsal slit between his scapular plates, a dull glow emerged. His bioreactors were responding to the cold. Lyra's readings showed internal thermal acceleration, his species' version of survival combustion. That explained why he hadn't moved before. He wasn't being cautious. He'd been ramping metabolic storage for activation. Varnock bioprofile confirmed, Astral reported. Thermal adaptation, aggressive. Heat retention, top tier. Sustained exposure endurance, extended. Lyra stepped forward, one pace only. No sudden gestures. Do you understand containment logic? She asked, not expecting a vocal response. This isn't aimed at you. It's at us. Kirak tilted his cranial ridges. Not confusion. Analysis. His neural cluster aligned toward her, sensors tracking her gaze, her posture, her micro-movements. Then, without warning, he blinked a triple pulse of light from his shoulder glands. Two short, one long. Earth's predator signal archive had a match. Shared threat. Build atop the ship. She replied with an arc of light from her shoulder unit, this time activating a short-range burst pattern used for high-threat communication between distant units in battlefield fog. She adjusted the code to mimic convergent migration. Predators forced into the same feeding grounds who negotiate through energy expenditure, not combat. Her readout spiked. Response accepted, symbolic mutual stand acknowledged, Kirak's tension index reduced by 22%. That was the first real shift. The air stung now. Skin below her collar burned in raw, cold exposure. Her left hand's dexterity reduced by half, but the communication channel had opened. Primitive, yes, but reliable. Predator species had survived not through cooperation, but through measured avoidance. And Lyra knew how to speak that language. Then the chamber lights dimmed again, brief, like a breath held and not released. Something in the containment layer shifted tone. Outside, Chief Drellis slammed his hand on the control interface. Why are suppression levels still rising? This is supposed to be a stabilization phase. His technician, Specialist Frawl, shrugged helplessly, the small plates along his forehead shedding microscopic flakes under stress. Chamber AI believes they've stabilized each other. Drellis leaned forward. What? They're not moving to engage. System reads containment success. So now it's testing threat tolerance range. Inside the dome, Lyra locked her eyes on Kirak. I'm not here to dominate, she said coldly. I came to survive. That hasn't changed. This time, he moved toward her. No sudden leap, no lunge. Just a heavy step forward, and then another. His body heat radiated as he approached. Sensors in her suit adjusted to the ambient thermal change. His light signals faded. His limbs lowered. Still alert, but no longer in strike posture. They stopped 2 meters apart. Lyra didn't offer a hand. She kept both arms lowered, weaponless. Kirak did not strike. Instead, he rotated his upper limb slightly inward. a symbolic gesture among Varnock warriors. It signaled observation mode. She returned the signal. Between them, the temperature stabilized by 3 degrees. Shared cold, shared ground, she said quietly. And Kirik Vor finally replied. Not with words, with silence that wasn't empty. It was tactical acknowledgement. And it was louder than any speech in the chamber above them. Something's wrong with the air, Lyra said, low and flat. Her lungs tightened on the inhale, just slightly, enough to notice the delay. Not suffocation, not yet. But the mix was off. The air had weight to it now, dense in a way that tricked the body into thinking it was still breathable. Oxygen concentration declining, Astro 7 responded instantly. Current level at 14.9%. Carbon dioxide increasing on a curve. Forecast deliberate environment shift. Timeline to hypoxia threshold. 4 minutes 37 seconds. Across the dome, Kirik Vor lowered his stance by a fraction. His flanks, which had remained slow pulsing and consistent, began showing irregular light shifts. Leah recognized the signs. Internal adjustments. The Varnock wasn't unaffected. He was enduring. Not passive containment, Lyra muttered, adjusting her neck seal. This is strategic suppression. They think we're neutralizing each other. Captain Astra's interface flickered a red caution arc across her HUD. Containment AI protocols updated. Assumed mutual threat scenario. Predictive outcome. Mutual collapse. Convenient, she said. The thermal sting from earlier had faded, replaced by the more insidious quiet of depleted air. Breathing wasn't labored, but it had lost ease. Each inhale felt thinner, like pulling air through cloth. Lyra's peripheral vision began to close ever so slightly, not from panic, but from the slow creep of oxygen deficit. She reached beneath the collar seam of her rig and activated a concealed subcutaneous latch. A small disc, flat, silver gray, with 3 circular nodes, slid upward, locking into place beneath her chin. Nanothread extractor active, ASAT reported. Deploying microfiltration network. Target, ambient O2 molecules, stabilizing uptake through dermal interface. A subtle vibration shivered along her jaw as microscopic filaments extended just beneath the skin. They weren't visible, but she could feel them moving, adjusting, feeding oxygen directly into her bloodstream through microvascular anchoring. Kirik didn't speak, but his torso had begun to tighten. The light pulses across his exoskeletal plates had shifted from cool blue to pale amber. A thermal adaptation sign, but also a stress indicator. He exhaled, and a faint, vibrating rasp cut the air, not vocal, reflexive. Lyra took 2 steps closer. People want us to collapse under controlled exposure. Test how we behave before unconsciousness sets in. Kirik's upper limbs raised slightly, his central ridges contracted. His sensory cluster swept across her chest and suit components, not aggressive, but reading, watching how her body responded. His breathing had grown heavier, not panicked, but compensating. She extended her left hand, slowly, and rotated her wrist outward, a signal gesture. Earth's Predator-class communication systems had developed non-verbal symbols for shared risk in hostile zones. She used the one for resource distribution. Vor didn't move for a long moment. Then, without warning, he retracted 2 limbs to his midsection and crouched into a semi-rest posture. His bioluminescence dimmed by 40%. Astra confirmed the meaning. Gesture acknowledged. Passive exchange protocol. Varnock behavior shift. Cooperative nonverbal. Recognition logged. You're running short, Lyra said. Same as me. Kirik tilted his upper torso slightly. One forelimb flicked forward, talons folding inward. Not a strike, a mimicry. He was echoing her hand movement, translated through species logic. Lyra unclipped a data node from her left thigh plate and slid it across the floor. It spun once, then stopped just short of his front claw. He didn't move right away. Only after her hands returned to her sides did he extend a limb, pulling it into his reach. Inside the node was an encrypted structural map of her nanothread oxygen extractor and the reactive thresholds it used for low-atmosphere environments. He scanned the data through a port embedded in his forearm ridge. When it returned, he blinked a new signal. 4 vertical light flashes, then 2 spiral shifts along his shoulder. Earth had no clean translation, but Astra tagged it as evaluated. Respect. Behind the containment barrier, the Concorde observers watched in real time through laser plasma displays lined across their panels. Chief Varn Drellis leaned forward, his fingers tensed against the edge of the console. "They're communicating," he muttered. "Under chemical stress." Counselor Jarev stood behind him, expression unreadable. "They're adapting." "You understand what that means?" the counselor asked quietly. Drellis didn't answer. Inside the dome, Lyra sat on one knee. She opened her right gauntlet and removed a second disc identical to her first. She didn't toss it. She didn't place it in his reach either. Instead, she stood and approached him directly, extending it forward. Arms steady, body aligned for strike recovery if needed. Orr's breathing slowed. He extended one limb. Not a clawed one, but the lower segment used by Varnock juveniles for learning tactile pressure gradients. He took the disc, closed his appendage around it, and lowered it to his thoracic port. "Unknown interface detected," Astra said. "Device received without disruption. Signal uplink terminated voluntarily. He's not trying to break it." "I didn't build it with security locks," Lyra said. "It's oxygen, not leverage." That was the first shift in trust. Orr's patterns changed. No longer flickers. Now they moved in vertical bands, alternating at his sides. "Translation uncertain," Astra noted. "Closest cultural alignment, unknown known, becomes less unknown." That was good enough. Lyra backed up 2 paces. She didn't want submission. She wanted shared motive. Cooperation, rooted in cold logic. "Daddy think we'll break," she said, half to herself. "Or worse, one of us will panic and make their point for them." Kirik took another long inhale, slower now. The embedded disc functioned. He tapped his side. Once. Twice. Then pointed to her collar. Signal returned, map and sustain. The chamber's AI logged a reduction in kinetic behavior. External reports flagged containment success. Suppression was working, the data claimed. No violence, no escalation. But inside, something else was happening. Lyra stood shoulder square. Vor did the same. They didn't speak. They didn't attack. They aligned, without compromise, without force. Just tactics and adaptation in the face of shared suffocation. And for the first time in the Council's history, 2 apex predators didn't default to war. They defaulted to strategy. Or worse, one of us will panic and make their point for them. Iraq took another long inhale, slower now. The embedded disc functioned. He tapped his side once, twice, then pointed to her collar. Signal returned. Match and sustain. The chamber's AI logged a reduction in kinetic behavior. External reports flagged containment success. Suppression was working, the data claimed. No violence, no escalation. But inside, something else was happening. Lyra stood shoulder square. Vor did the same. They didn't speak. They didn't attack. They allied. Without compromise. Without force. Just tactics and adaptation, in the face of shared suffocation. And for the first time in the Council's history, 2 apex predators didn't default to war. They defaulted to strategy. "New vector detected. Toxin presence rising," Astra 7 announced, its audio filter clipped and immediate. Lyra didn't flinch. She'd trained for exposure-based sabotage in atmospheric blends worse than this, but the shift was unmistakable. Chemical density layering the chamber's air. Subtle and sour at the back of her throat, the taste hit first. Not bitter, more like alkaline residue sliding down her tongue, then catching in her nasal cavity, as if the oxygen itself were dragging toxins behind it. Human identified. Low-range neuroinhibitor. Origin. Filtration override. Symptom curve. Slow paralysis beginning with motor delay. Human resistance, moderate. Varnock tolerance, unknown. Across the dome, Kirik moved differently now. His limbs slower, not due to aggression but response latency. The left segment of his thoracic shell flared briefly, exposing inner folds that shimmered unnaturally. That wasn't display behavior. It was venting. His system was trying to rid itself of the intrusion, but it wasn't working fast enough. Lyra flicked her right thumb across the suit's secondary interface pad. A sliver of pressure pressed against her spine as the bioadaptive filtration layer activated along her circulatory jacket. Thin threads wound tightly around her ribs, pulling nanoparticle sensors into action. They adjusted the pH levels of her blood chemistry in real time, forcing antibodies into tactical overdrive. Biochemical threshold stabilized. Motor control 96% efficiency. Cortical functions optimal. Kirik, on the other hand, began vocalizing, not sound in the traditional sense. The tone was subharmonic, a pitch low enough to resonate through bone, not eardrums. It wasn't a roar or warning. It was data. Stress signals layered across bioacoustic harmonics. Lyra's chest vibrated with each pulse, like distant machinery resonating through steel. Translate subharmonics now, she commanded. Vocal patterns consistent with Varnick distress signaling, Astra responded. Interpretation, environment compromised, internal filtration failing, seeking countermeasure. Lyra adjusted her stance. The center of the dome no longer felt like an arena. It was transforming into a crucible, one where proximity wasn't threat, but resource. She took a deliberate step forward, her boots scraping against the resin-coated surface. Kirik turned his body fractionally toward her, exoskeletal joints responding with visible strain. "Bore," she said firmly, her voice level but clipped. "We both drop if we continue solo containment. Your internal flush protocols are falling behind. You need counter-biological pairing." She kept walking. 1 meter closed, then another. He didn't lunge. He didn't posture. But he emitted another subharmonic pulse, this one inverted. Astra flagged it instantly. Signal recognized. Open cohabitation proposal. Lyra opened her left gauntlet and pulled free a flexible inhalation strip. Short, coated in nanoreactive foam and infused with adaptive enzymes. She didn't explain. She simply extended it. Vor didn't hesitate. He extended a thin, curled limb, one used for surgical feeding in Varnock hatcheries. The appendage accepted the strip with almost robotic efficiency, sliding it into a small thoracic port along his upper rib seam. His bioluminescence reacted instantly. Not flaring, but stabilizing. The irregular patterns that had scattered across his side panels resolved into slow, rhythmic bands. Neurotoxin regulation detected. Astra noted, cross-species buffer functioning, co-adaptive tolerance now within safe margins. Lyra didn't exhale. That wasn't trust, that was logic confirmed. "I'm moving closer," she stated. Shared containment strategy. You resist biologically, I filter chemically. Combined, we hold longer. Vor's posture shifted subtly. Lower to the ground, limbs withdrawn to half-range. Not submission. Invitation. She approached with caution, every movement deliberate. At 2 feet apart, she dropped to one knee, adjusting the seal along her thigh to expose the outer suit's secondary emission node. A faint thermal current pulsed from the panel. Kirik extended 2 limbs and positioned them just behind her shoulders. Not touching, circling, creating an environmental envelope. His body temperature began to climb in increments. The dome's toxin levels didn't drop, but their shared zone became a pocket of functional resistance. Behind containment glass, Specialist Frall's fingers hovered over the control array. Their signatures just merged. Chief Drellis's voice was sharp. Merged how? Environmental overlap. Human filtration systems are now affecting the Varnock's vitals. They're co-processing containment. It's synchronized resistance. Counselor Jareff's expression remained hard. You mean they're not trying to kill each other? Frall nodded. They're stabilizing as a unit. Inside the dome, Lyra rested her elbow against her knee, her body framed inside Kirak's forward limb arc. His breathing remained steady. No sound. But his sensory cluster hovered close, observing her skin, her patterns of heat, even her pupil dilation. Concord protocols don't include this outcome, she said. Confirmed, Astra responded. Shared Apex containment protocols unaccounted for in diplomatic emergency simulations. Log it anyway. Kirak's flank flared once just along the edge of his dorsal ridge. The pulse was faint but targeted. A signal. Astra processed the code. Phrase equivalent. Agreement acknowledged. Hostility suspended under shared mitigation parameters. That was the first time their survival strategies had become one plan instead of two reactions. The toxin levels spiked briefly. Her suit warned of increased saturation beyond external boundaries. But within their small zone, within the layered shield of thermal output and chemical filtration, their biology pushed back together. Lyra turned her head slightly, voice low. You were supposed to outlast me. Kirak adjusted his rear limbs. An instinctual flex Earth had catalogued as repositioning in non-predatory terms. No prey here, she said, just loud enough to reach him. Only variables. And I'd rather be the one defining them. He responded with a ripple along his side. A pattern of blue, orange, and green alternating in tight sequence. Translation pattern. Shared decision. Status accepted. They stayed like that, together but alert, as the environment attempted to force another collapse. But every new suppression tactic had to move through both of them now. And their combined adaptations weren't simply surviving, they were outperforming containment. Two predators, no longer divided by species or threat index. Just two apex forms, calculating how to endure as a single function. Energy spike incoming. Spectrum shifting to gamma, Astra 7 announced. The tone had shifted. Less analytical, more clipped. Lyra steadied herself against the dome's inner edge. A tremor passed through her right leg. Not muscular fatigue, but nervous misfiring. Her suit's inner mesh recalibrated as radiation levels surged. The chamber was no longer running containment simulations. It had escalated to sterilization logic. Kirak's glow intensified. His flanks flushed with rising luminescence, deep amber flowing into silver-edged streaks that pulsed through his exoskeletal seams. His core temperature was climbing fast, but not as a reaction to stress. It was adaptive intake. He was absorbing the radiation, metabolizing it into stored power. Lyra's visor flashed red. Radiation density passing neural threshold. Brainwave patterns disrupted. Cerebral activity slowing. I'm aware, she muttered, voice thick. Her thoughts slowed, as if wading through dense fluid. Vocabulary stumbled. Responses lagged. Even Astra's interface blinked slower. Her mouth tasted like dust and copper. Dry, metallic, not in substance but in sensation. It scraped across the roof of her mouth as she tried to swallow. Kirak remained upright, limbs planted. The radiant outline of his body shimmered with intensity. Each movement he made left a slight blur behind, not from speed, but from overcharged heat, refracting through the supersaturated air. Gamma output. Lethal to exposed soft tissue within minutes. Recommend immediate shielding or neural degradation will become permanent. Lyra reached for her thigh strap. Her fingers, numb, missed the buckle the first time. Second time worked. She pulled free a folded sheet, coated in radiation barrier mesh, lightweight, durable, designed for planetary solar flares. Not intended for this. Kirak's head turned slightly, sensing her movement. His forward limbs braced against the floor, joints flaring with heat loss. He was holding position, but even his endurance had a ceiling. "I need proximity," Lyra said, each word costlier than the last. He didn't step back. That alone was confirmation. She moved with effort, feet dragging against the floor like anchors. The radiation storm swelled around them, an invisible tide washing every surface, burning through layers that had already endured too much. When she reached him, she unwrapped the mesh with shaking fingers. It unfolded into a crescent shield, one side reinforced with an induction collar meant to clamp to armored fixtures. Kirik recognized the utility instantly. Without waiting for explanation, he extended a dorsal limb and wrapped it halfway around her back, securing her close. His torso radiated energy like a slow furnace, pulsing in waves. The outer plates of his upper body widened, forming a half-shell enclosure. Lyra tucked the barrier sheet between them, angling the induction arc upward, sealing it over the small environmental seam where their bodies intersected. The field snapped shut. The radiation warning slowed. Containment zone achieved. Interior radiation levels reduced to survivable thresholds. Internal neurological response stabilizing. Her vision cleared slightly. The fog in her mind began to recede. Her limbs ached, but control returned in degrees. Kirik's breathing changed, deeper but steadier. His heat output plateaued, and his bioluminescence leveled to a slow cycle of dark blue and white. Astra flagged the pattern. Signal, biological plateau. Maximum absorption achieved, predator species entering conservation state. She pressed her palm lightly against his side, anchoring the barrier in place. "You just ran hot enough to cook both of us." He responded with a flick of his inner arm. Low movement, no aggression. It landed just beneath her elbow, resting there. A response, not a correction. The radiation storm outside continued, unchecked. The containment AI had not disengaged the sweep. It still believed the threat required elimination. Yet inside the hybrid cocoon, Varnock mass and Terran tech fused by necessity, two apex forms had created a self-sustaining island of survival logic. Outside, Chief Drellis stared at the readouts. Internal radiation levels are dropping, but not in the chamber, just in one location. "Illy created a dead zone?" Frall asked, astonished. "No, not dead. Isolated," Drellis said. "They're shielding each other." Counselor Jarev stood with arms crossed, laser plasma display flickering behind him. The Concorde's AI overlays showed vitals across the dome, marking two life forms locked into one survival cluster. Sharing resources, adapting under synchronized algorithms. "Unnatural," he hissed. "Or natural," Drellis countered, "if survival is a language." Inside the shielded core, Lyra adjusted the barrier node, reinforcing its center with a compression fold. Her body pressed into Kirik's shell, not for comfort, but for shared efficiency. Any space between them meant heat loss, atmospheric drift, energy leak. Closeness here wasn't alliance. It was function. Her voice, when it came, was quieter now. "This is what they feared. Not aggression, not dominance. Compatibility." Kirak emitted a single vibration through his inner frame. Astra interpreted the shift. Response code. Containment achieved through intersection, not opposition. Lyra blinked slowly. She didn't smile. She couldn't afford emotional response. But the data said enough. They weren't resisting containment. They were repurposing it. Human survival mesh, Varnock energy conversion, merged in a microclimate no Concorde simulation had accounted for. Astro's final log for the sequence was short. Functional synthesis confirmed, apex logic integrated. They weren't supposed to be allies, not even co-survivors, and yet they'd built something the Concorde couldn't calculate. Shared viability under extinction logic. "Override panels not responding, hard lines dead," Drellis snapped, slamming the side of the master relay with the edge of his palm. "Internal feedback loop just kicked us out of our own system." Specialist Frall flicked his fingers across the heads-up display, bypassing the fail-safe overlay to reroute diagnostics. The laser plasma screens above flickered, reforming into mirrored surveillance feeds from inside the dome. Heat signatures, audio stream, biometric logs. Everything was still functional, but none of it answered to them. They've cross-languaged their survival patterns, Frowl said, more to himself than anyone else. She's using tech, he's using biology, and the chamber's systems think that's containment compliance. Counselor Hurl Jareb turned toward the main viewing column, his mandibles rigid with disgust. Then we escalate. Full depressurization, atmospheric nullification. If the dome won't isolate them, we dissolve the air around them. This would breach every protocol we've ratified in the last 70 years, Drellis countered, jaw tight. 17 warfront treaties, 3 containment conventions, Froll added without looking up. You'd need full spectrum approval. I'll draft the vote, Jareb growled. Across the chamber's outer deck, factions whispered into neural relays. Some were calling for immediate intervention, citing biosecurity. Others argued for sustained observation, claiming that a predator-predator containment scenario had never reached this level of tactical synthesis. Inside the dome, Lyra exhaled slowly, careful to keep her center of gravity aligned with the curvature of Curic's enclosing limbs. The radiation had faded to tolerable levels, but her body still ached from neurological drag. Her right leg twitched involuntarily once every 30 seconds, a byproduct of cerebral suppression. Kirak shifted weight, allowing one appendage to lower toward the ground, pressing into the floor with measured force. His inner thoracic flares had cooled, but his sensors remained engaged, flicking occasionally toward the containment seams. Predation doesn't require dominance, Lyra said evenly, voice barely above a whisper. It only requires leverage. He didn't speak, but his exoskeletal pulses adjusted, translating Astra's subchannel parse. Apex form survives not by competition, but by control of outcome. Lyra nodded. And control doesn't mean violence. Behind them, a soft click signaled a new uplink. Audio feed now active from the dome to the observation core. Someone, likely Froll, had intentionally passed their conversation into the open feed lines. Jareb noticed instantly. Mute 'em, he barked. Drellis held up a hand. No, let it play. The chamber filled with their voices, measured, flat, without panic. No grand speeches, no declarations of defiance. Just 2 apex intelligences discussing survival as logic, not ideology. Kirak moved again, closer this time. Not aggressively, just enough to fold his inner limbs around the barrier shield Lyra had set between them. His sensory ridge aligned with hers. Astra confirmed. Varnock thermal envelope adjusted. Zone now optimized for combined metabolic conservation. Outside the dome, split-screen diagnostics across the Council's laser plasma array displayed 2 species functioning inside one environment. Breathing in staggered rhythm, conserving energy in sync. Froll leaned closer to his console. They've created a hybridized biome. You mean to tell me, Jareb said slowly, that a human and a Varnock have achieved something none of our defense labs could simulate? Drellis didn't look away from the feed. I'm telling you they're rewriting our threat models while we argue about whether they're still threats. Inside, Lyra lifted her left hand and triggered a 3-second beam across her palm. An encoded signal using old Terran Apex negotiation syntax. The sequence: mutual recognition, resource parity, situational alignment. Carrick's reply was instantaneous. His flank strobed once, then felt dim. Translation: conditions accepted, neutral zone established. Neutral zones aren't given, they're earned, she said quietly. Outside, pressure built across political sub-channels. One delegation from the Miraset enclave issued a formal inquiry. If 2 Apex-class species voluntarily stabilize, is forced intervention an act of aggression? The response from the Rakhan Trade Collective came just as fast. If you intervene, you destabilize a naturally forming alliance. That's a strategic liability, not a containment breach. Jareb scowled. We don't need more predators forming unions. We need obedience to containment. Drellis turned away from the console. Then maybe you shouldn't have locked two of the most adaptive organisms in a kill chamber and expected anything less than convergence. Thrall adjusted the interface and cast the internal feed to all 12 core council nodes. The screen flicked once, then displayed Lyra and Kirik inside their hybrid cocoon, unmoving, breathing in mirrored intervals. Below that, Astra's running survival metrics scrolled silently. Heart rate sync deviation, 2.1%. Thermal output equalization achieved. Shared stress response, drop, 43%. Predictive hostilities, suspended indefinitely. No one spoke for several seconds. Then, softly from the secondary command podium came a new voice, Kret Dralin, representative of the Nysian core systems. This is not failure. This is a new variable. We should be studying it, not silencing it. Jarev flared. It's manipulation. They're showcasing restraint now so they can negotiate from dominance later. Or they've simply adapted faster than any species we've monitored, Drella said flatly. Including ours. Inside the dome, Lyra tapped her collar lightly. Astra sent a shortwave pulse to Kirak's sensory node, a digital message attached to a simple linguistic string. Do you understand what this means for them? He returned a pattern across his ribs, and no longer control the narrative. And they didn't. Intent without output is dysfunction, Kirak said, voice low, nearly a vibration within the thermal cocoon they shared. Lyra shifted her weight, her back pressed lightly against his folded thoracic arc. Her hands rested across her upper thighs, fingers flexing, recalibrating fine motor control still delayed from earlier neural drag. Her eyes stayed locked on the diagnostics scrolling across her inner display. Vitals syncing, temperature holding, brainwave recovery stable. The metrics weren't just survival. They were cooperation made tangible. You're quoting doctrine, she responded, tone even. Kirak's inner mandibles clicked once. We do not elevate those who perform for applause. We elevate what endures efficiently. Efficiency over pride, Lyra muttered, half to herself. You build governments around that? No. We dismantle them when they forget it. Astra 7 highlighted the exchange with a short data tag. It had begun compiling emergent behavioral markers under a new subroutine. Cross-apex negotiation, stable phase initiation. I was briefed on your dominion, Lyra continued. What they expected was tribal brutality. Territorial squabbles wrapped in grandeur. Not civil doctrine built around function. Function scales. Emotion dilutes. We don't conquer to display power. We remove barriers to continuity. Lyra leaned forward slightly, drawing a compressed panel from her right wrist. It projected a compact interface into the narrow space between them. No lights, no flare, just raw code threading across a modular readout. She didn't need permission to show it. He didn't flinch when the projection began. This is Earth's diplomatic overlay, filtered through systems logic, not culture. I brought it for show, not use. Now it's the only thing we've got to write with. Kirik watched, unmoving, as Astra's interface parsed open protocol lines into editable structures. The header flashed twice, then held. Proposed framework. Terran Varnock Apex Alliance. Initial conditions protocol. She gestured to the top line. No mission objective ever survives first contact. So we set terms that work under threat. Terms that hold when containment breaks, not after. He extended a primary limb and tapped twice against the floating architecture. A column expanded. He entered his additions, careful, deliberate strokes, that restructured the first clause. No hierarchy. Mutual interface. All authority derived from shared environmental impact. Lyra nodded once. Good. You value ecosystem balance over imposed law. We don't regulate the jungle, he replied. We learn how to walk through it without bleeding. The next clause scrolled into view. Lyra added her input. Adaptive logic prioritized over legacy governance. History can't justify inefficiency. Kirik paused. Then slowly he expanded that clause, adding a secondary line. Legacy must evolve, or it becomes obstruction. Inside the Concord's external control tower, Chief Drellis watched the charter unfold via live telemetry. Astra's feed, now directly linked to the heads-up display array above the chamber, was syncing every clause. Concord protocols didn't allow remote deletion of autonomous diplomatic logs. Not while the ambassador remained inside an active threat zone. Specialist Frawl tapped through the mirrored feed. They're writing doctrine, right now, under suppression. No one told them they were allowed to, Drella said. People are warning us to stop. Frawl replied. On screen, the next article began to form. Shared boundaries enforceable only through energy efficiency metrics. Lyra arched an eyebrow at that one. That's your way of saying, no wasted wars. We lose energy when enemies do not understand why they bleed. It's wasteful. She added her own modification. Engagement justified only if loss of dialogue exceeds cost of conflict. His cold Kirak said. That's honest. He made no objection. Back in the observation wing, multiple council factions had started filing provisional statements. Some expressed concern, others demanded legal reviews. But 5, so far, had submitted curiosity notices, flagging the new treaty as pre-ratification grade, which meant they were watching to see if it could hold, not if it would fail. Jareb's lips curled in contempt. They're scripting policy inside a closed system without ratified authority. They're not asking for seats, Drellis responded. They're writing rules because they were denied the chance to follow any. Inside the dome, Astro pushed a notification into Lyra's right peripheral. Concord surveillance streams linked. Audio logs are active. She didn't ask who opened the feed. She only turned slightly and said without ceremony, if they're listening, then let's finish it properly. Kirak adjusted the projection interface. New segment appeared. Clause 7. Apex Parallelism Protocol. Non-dependency governance. She keyed in her response. We don't need a seat to influence the table. Influence comes from design, not display. Display fades, structure remains, he added. The projection finalized, Astra confirmed. Full Apex Interaction Charter, complete. Version 1. Uploading to Concord archives. At the upper decks of the chamber, the laser plasma panels updated again. A single line appeared across all primary systems. Terran Varnuk charter logged. Sync to interspecies dialogue. The Conqueror hadn't authorized it. The system didn't care. Consensus didn't wait. The act had already occurred. Inside, Lyra leaned her head back briefly, just enough to see the ridge of Kirak's neck flare and settle. Neither of them moved to claim credit. They weren't allies for status. They were aligned by logic. She broke the silence. We've redefined cooperation without ever sharing a belief. That's going to upset them. He clicked once. Quietly. Astra translated. Let them be uncomfortable. Adaptation begins with unease. Containment protocol terminated, Astra 7 confirmed. Seal integrity released by executive override. Chamber reverting to open status. Lyra Vale didn't blink. The air around her still carried residual heat from the radiation sweep. Her suit's inner diagnostics showed muscle response returning to baseline, but she kept her posture locked. Across from her, Kirak Vor rose in silence. No words, no flair, just function. The wall split, the containment dome pulled back, not as an invitation, as an admission. Lyra stepped forward. Not for effect, not to signal dominance. She walked because she could, because she was still standing after a sequence of fail points no other diplomat would have survived, or followed without prompt. The chamber quieted instantly. Delegates didn't whisper. No one issued orders. They stared, some trying to make sense of what they were seeing, others already reading the implications. 2 Apex-class threats were meant to neutralize each other. What exited the dome was not weakened, not damaged, not isolated. It was aligned, not as allies, not as friends, but as an operational unit. Astra sent a system-wide ping. Upload complete. Charter. Active. Survival logs synced with Concord database. Outcome classification, strategic convergence under pressure. The heads-up panels across the chamber updated simultaneously. Data streamed across every tier. Every physiological index, every adaptation logged, every escalation documented. Everything that had been denied before had just been proven, line by line. High Counselor Hrolk Jareb's display froze twice as real-time graphs nullified his earlier arguments. His emergency override authority was stripped from his command stack. He stood, expecting objection. No one gave it. Lyra faced the central tier. You classified me as a threat. That was accurate. No delegate interrupted. I didn't survive this by resisting your chamber. I didn't dominate it. I identified the problem, calculated the response, and used the variables you underestimated. Kirik stepped beside her, unprompted. His flanks flashed once. His translation node interfaced with the council's systems without ceremony. I observed the same pattern. She did not posture, she acted. When elimination failed, she reorganized the outcome. The chamber remained quiet. Jareth broke rank. This entire incident is a manipulation of optics. Nothing about this guarantees long-term viability. These outcomes are isolated. You can't extrapolate protocol from improvisation. Chief Durellis responded first. Counselor, you didn't design the result. You triggered it. They outmaneuvered containment. We can't even run the simulation again. It already wrote the end condition. The central vote sequence triggered automatically. No calls for delay. No procedural challenge. Astra updated Lyra's HUD in real time. Concord. Vote active. 811 approval. 6. Opposition. Decision, observer status granted. Adjustment, integration path reduced to 15 cycles. That was it. No declarations, no fanfare. Just numbers. Cold approval through action. Lyra didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her goal had never been validation. It was presence. That had now been established. Bohr turned toward the chamber without any flair. His voice was steady, translated into blunt binary syntax. If your concern was what humans might become, then your system answered that for you. She didn't need permission to prove capability. She required only pressure. He paused. She was left to collapse. Instead, she produced structure. If she is a threat, she is the one worth kneeling to. No one responded. They couldn't. Jareth sat down. He didn't speak again. Lyra turned and walked toward the exit. Not escorted, not guided, just observed. Behind her, every display continued cycling survival charts and structural synthesis logs. The Concord wouldn't remember her for aggression. It would remember her for adaptation. She never asked to be trusted. She made trust unnecessary.